You don't like the way we pay our fighters? Too fucking bad. Go start another MMA organization and you go fucking figure out how to do it. And you can pay them $10 million a fight, $30 million a fight, whatever you want to do.
All right, so after Dana White unleashed some really fiery remarks about UFC fighters, it didn't take long for the entire light heavyweight division to make their move. These guys were furious and completely fed up, so they united for a massive announcement, one that's about to shake the UFC to its absolute core. They're jumping ship, but seriously, if you think that's shocking, just wait until you hear what they're planning to do next. Let's break down this breaking point, where fighters across multiple divisions are standing up, speaking out, and making one thing crystal clear. If the UFC won't pay them what they're truly worth, they will find someone who will. The cracks in the system have been visible for years, but recently, those cracks have turned into massive chasms. The most shocking revelation actually came from an unlikely source, Jon Jones himself, speaking about the dire financial situations that many UFC fighters are still facing. Picture this: professional athletes, at the absolute highest level of their sport, competing in front of millions, yet they're forced to live in their gym because they can't even afford an apartment. Yeah, Jones didn't mince words when he painted this incredibly grim reality for everyone.
Most of the guys who are doing the absolute worst are not in a position that they could say publicly, I have a second job, I'm borrowing money from my parents.
Right.
I know so many fighters that are living in the Jackson's MMA gym because they can't afford to have their own apartment. And they're UFC fighters.
Just let that sink in for a moment. Seriously, these aren't just any athletes. These are UFC fighters, individuals, who've reached the absolute pinnacle of mixed martial arts. Yet, they're out here borrowing money from their own parents. And get this, living in gyms. It's a reality that would be absolutely shocking in literally any other professional sport. But in an organization that's projected to generate around $1.4 billion in revenue in 2024, it's not just shocking, it's nothing short of scandalous. But Jon Jones actually went even further than just the financial side, touching on something much deeper: the profound idea that some injustices are simply worth sacrificing everything.
And if I have to have a bad relationship with Dana, sit out for 2 years, 3 years, to bring light to what's happening.
Let's not sit out for 2 or even 3 years, just to bring some much-needed life to a cause that truly matters.
What's happening then these are the things that people remember you for more than winning belts.
This isn't just empty talk. It's a powerful philosophy that's rapidly spreading like wildfire throughout the entire UFC roster. Fighters are truly beginning to realize that their ultimate legacy might not be defined solely by championship gold, but by whether they courageously stood up for change when it mattered the absolute most. The most powerful statement any fighter can truly make isn't delivered at some fancy press conference. It's made quite simply with their feet, walking right out the door. And honestly, nobody's exit sent more shockwaves through the entire MMA world, quite like Francis Ngannou's departure back in. This former heavyweight champion, renowned for his devastating knockout power and his incredibly inspiring rags-to-riches story from Cameroon, didn't just leave, he completely torched the bridge on his way out. Dana White famously claimed that he offered Ngannou a deal that would have made him the highest-paid heavyweight in UFC history, even more than Brock Lesnar, more than absolutely anyone.
We offered Francis a deal that would have made him the highest paid heavyweight in the history of the company.
Yes, more than Lesnar, more than anybody. But here's where the entire narrative gets incredibly interesting, and perhaps a little bit tricky. Dana White's official explanation for Ngannou's departure actually revealed far more about the UFC's underlying philosophy than he probably ever intended to.
I think Francis is in a place right now where he doesn't want to take a lot of risk. Feels like he's in a good position where he could fight lesser opponents and make more money. So we're gonna let him do.
That dismissive tone from Dana White really speaks volumes, doesn't it? But Ngannou, the man himself, had a completely different perspective on why he ultimately walked away. For him, it wasn't about avoiding easy fights or anything like that. Instead, it was fundamentally about respect, about being truly valued as an athlete, and about a pay structure that, quite frankly, just didn't make any sense whatsoever. You need to hear his raw frustration for yourself.
When you're talking about pay-per-view, then you're negotiating pay-per-view, and then you see number like 1.25 pay buys and stuff like that, and the pay-per-view is going from 60 to $80 in the past 5 years, and you realize that there is 0.25 that is on top of it is out of the $20 that been added on. I'm like, come on, man. It's not my first pay-per-view contract.
And when you look at the mathematical breakdown, it's absolutely damning. Pay-per-view prices for fans are soaring by a whopping $20, yet the fighters' cut, the people actually putting their bodies on the line, increases by a measly quarter of that. Seriously. It's exactly the kind of negotiation that leaves you feeling completely insulted and undervalued rather than appreciated. Ngannou himself continued to elaborate on this profound frustration.
It wasn't even about the money, even how he was structured, even how he was. I'm like, this doesn't make sense. You know, I went home and I was so, frustrated.
And here's the absolute kicker. Ngannou's gamble paid off spectacularly. His bold move to the PFL and his subsequent high-profile boxing matches against legends like Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua proved his point in the most definitive way possible. He actually earned more in a single night of boxing than in his entire UFC tenure. Suddenly, the idea of getting your money elsewhere wasn't just some empty threat, it was a proven blueprint. But Ngannou's departure, that was truly just the beginning. Across the UFC roster, fighters are now finding their voices, and they are definitely not holding anything back. Take Justin Gaethje, for example. The fan-favorite lightweight known for his absolutely all-out brawls. He openly expressed deep frustration in mid-2025, feeling profoundly underappreciated by the UFC. After consistently delivering highlight reel performances and taking massive damage in the octagon, he straight up stated he was done doing show and tell for the promotion without proper recognition or compensation that truly matched his insane risks. Gaethje's complaints weren't just about the size of his paychecks either, they touched on something far deeper and more personal. It's about the emotional drain of pouring every fiber of your being into these fights, of sacrificing your physical health and your entire future, only to feel completely sidelined when it comes to opportunities and rewards. His narrative is one of profound burnout, where even a fighter who has headlined major events and taken tremendous damage questions why the UFC doesn't reciprocate their dedication. Then there's Askar Askarov, a supremely talented flyweight who also left the UFC. This was after the promotion flat-out refused to improve his contract, despite him holding a strong record with only a single loss to a dominant champion. Askarov made the no-brainer decision to return to his home country for better-paying opportunity. His exit starkly highlighted how the UFC's rigid stance on contract negotiations can unfortunately push highly skilled athletes away, especially those from international backgrounds who face additional hurdles like visas and complex taxes. Even more telling is the story of Tyler Diamond, a former PFL fighter and Ultimate Fighter contestant who also faced similar frustrations, and perhaps most heartbreakingly, consider Alex Pereira's situation. This light heavyweight kingpin, who enjoyed a meteoric rise from kickboxing to UFC superstardom, shared a disheartening message in 2025 after hearing something likely related to his pay or treatment that only amplified his existing thoughts of retirement. Pereira, who has never been one to publicly badmouth the UFC, actually admitted that this news left him questioning his entire future in the sport. When even reigning champions at the absolute pinnacle feel this way, you know something is fundamentally broken within the system. But to truly understand why these fighters are reaching their breaking points, we absolutely need to examine the system that created this crisis in the first place. The system that, quite frankly, breaks fighters. To grasp why so many fighters are now fleeing, we need to examine the harsh financial reality they are forced to confront. The UFC operates under a compensation framework that is fundamentally different from traditional major sports leagues, and frankly, not in a good way. Unlike the NFL or NBA, where athletes are considered employees with collective bargaining agreements that ensure around 50% revenue sharing, UFC fighters are explicitly classified as independent contractors. This seemingly technical distinction has absolutely massive implications. The UFC's revenue share for its fighters typically hovers between a paltry 16% and 20% of the organization's total earnings. Let me truly put that in perspective for you. In 2024, the UFC generated approximately $1.4 billion in revenue, with fighters collectively receiving an estimated $225 million to $260 million. That translates to only about 16 to 18% of the total pie. Now you might be thinking, that's still a lot of money, right? But when you actually divide that among the 600 plus fighters on the roster, the harsh reality becomes incredibly stark. For entry-level fighters in 2025, contracts typically start at around $14,000 to show up, and $14,000. What this means is that if you lose your fight, you walk away with a mere $14,000 before taxes, management fees, which are typically 10 to 20%, training costs, and all your other various expenses. Let's do some quick math here. After a 20% management cut, you're already down to just. Now factor in training camp costs for coaches, sparring partners, nutritionists, medical care. That's easily another $5,000. Shockingly, 43% of UFC fighters earn less than $45,000 annually before expenses, with a median salary of a meager $50,000. This is far, far below living wages in high-cost areas like Las Vegas or California, where many of these athletes train. Dana White, the UFC's president, has his own very specific philosophy about fighter pay, and he's certainly not shy about defending it. His arguments reveal a particular worldview about how combat sports should operate. So let's listen to his reason.
With boxing too, is that all guys are overpaid. And every time they put on a fight, it's a going out of business sale.
You know what I mean? We're just trying to get as much money as we possibly can from you guys, and then boom, we're out of here. That's the mindset Dana White seems to be referring to, which is pretty revealing.
We'll see you in 3 years. You can't build a league like that. You can't build a sport. You can't have 750 fighters under contract, making money, feeding their families every year with that kind of mentality. It doesn't work.
Dana White really tries to position the UFC as the responsible steward of MMA, aiming to build something sustainable for the long term, rather than burning bright and fast, like, say, boxing. But here's the crazy irony in all of this. He's criticizing boxing's model, while countless UFC fighters are increasingly seeing boxing as their only escape route to genuinely better pay. When someone directly asked him about the pay scale, White had this to say.
So what we did is we built a business model where they share. If you're the champion, you share in the pay-per-view revenue. If you're the guy headlining the card, or there's been some special occasions where we know you're bringing in the money too, that you're a big draw. So you two get to share in the pay-per-view revenue.
But here's the undeniable problem with that particular model. It actively creates an absolutely massive wealth gap between the top 1% of fighters and literally everyone else on the roster. And even for those elite top-tier fighters, the UFC's significant shift away from traditional pay-per-view models is a game-changer. With their 2025 announcement of a colossal 7-year, $7.7 billion media rights deal with Paramount, it effectively ends the long-standing ESPN Plus PPV structure, replacing it with streaming-inclusive broadcasting. While this could boost overall revenues to over $1.1 billion annually for the UFC, it might simultaneously reduce individual fighter leverage for those crucial PPV bonuses. However, perhaps White's most revealing moment came after fighters actually convinced him to raise performance bonuses. The very next event featured 7 straight decisions, and his reaction? It was absolutely visceral and completely unfiltered.
The fighters managed to get you to up the bonuses. Do you think there's an argument that maybe you should just up them to...
I think tonight showed that we should not. No. Upping them doesn't change anything. It doesn't make anybody fight any harder. It doesn't change anything. I'm not doing this again.
His commitment to that very strong, very opinionated stance was, and still remains, absolutely unwavering.
Ever.
Today was the last day that I'm doing that. Yeah. Not saying that in the future the bonuses couldn't get up, but I'm not going to be at a press conference and say 200, 300, fucking never again.
And when he's directly confronted about the broader ongoing criticism regarding fighter pay, Dana White's response is essentially always the same. A blunt take it or leave it. There's no room for negotiation or discussion in his eyes.
Every time somebody comes out and says, oh, you don't pay your fighters, you don't pay your fighters. I could come out and do this I'm not. I don't give a shit. You don't like the way we pay our fighters? Too fucking bad. Go start another MMA organization and you go fucking figure out how to do it.
But perhaps the most absolutely damning critique of the UFC's entire system truly comes from those who have actually lived it. Francis Ngannou didn't just simply leave the organization, he powerfully pulled back the curtain on how the negotiation process actually works, or, more accurately, how it doesn't work at all. In a truly revealing conversation, Ngannou laid bare the illusion of negotiation that UFC fighters are constantly forced to contend with.
I think the way that the business is set up, like they pay you whatever they want to pay you. They let you pretend that you're negotiating while you're not negotiating, because either way, you're still in the contract.
So, this is precisely where that independent contractor classification, often touted as freedom, actually transforms into a financial cage for fighters. Ngannou himself vividly broke down this insidious cycle, revealing its true nature.
Let's say 40 months contract. By 20 months, they will come to negotiate. A little bit more money if you say yes, yeah. Then they are giving you a new 40 months, which means they start over because of the money that they added. But because by that time, your value is like maybe 2 or 3 times what they are offering.
And here's where the system truly becomes exploitative in an almost unbelievable way. Imagine for a moment that you're a fighter struggling desperately to make ends meet. You're finally about to get paid $50,000 for your next fight, money you absolutely desperately need just to survive. Then out of the blue, the UFC offers you a brand new contract with a seemingly better $100,000 per fight. Sounds great, right? But here's the catch. It completely resets your entire existing deal, trapping you all over again. Ngannou vividly described this incredibly cunning trap that fighters often fall into.
I mean, you're kind of like broke, you're struggling, and then you're seeing your next fight, okay, 50,000, you have to pay this and pay that and get away with maybe 20,000, and you have to pay your loan and all the stuff, and they have a new contract, 100,000. It's really hard to turn that down when you're in that position.
It's clear that the system is intentionally designed to keep fighters in a constant state of financial precarity, ensuring they can never truly afford the luxury or the leverage to negotiate for what they're actually worth.
That's not your value, but it's a...
So, the obvious question is, why don't fighters just collectively strike? Why don't they simply band together and refuse to fight until things fundamentally change? The answer to that question reveals yet another deeply ingrained layer of the UFC's control over its athletes. When this very idea was suggested to Ngannou, his response was incredibly illuminating, shedding light on the harsh realities they face.
Okay, so this is the thing. Because you were struggling, you were expecting your fight for the $50,000, which is what a lot of people in the UFC they do, and even for less than that. And they have even borrow money for finance their training camp or whatever. So they are expecting that money to pay back. And if you tell this guy to go on strike, why he has a $50,000 coming up who can like save him from the guillotine, like release his neck a little bit.
The UFC, you see, doesn't just control a fighter's present career. They exert immense control over their immediate futures. Miss a single fight, and it's not just that crucial payday you lose, you might actually lose your coveted spot on the entire roster. That's how precarious their position is.
Not because the UFC has the power to cut you. I'm going on strike. Oh, really? You're doing that?
If you're out at the wrong moment, or if you even think about doing something they don't like, you're just out, man. It's that simple, according to Ngannou's brutal assessment.
Then you don't even have that 50,000 anymore. What next?
Ngannou painted the bleak reality.
So a lot of fighters, they don't want to compromise that because that's only what they get. You know, they don't have a saving. They live day by day, fight by fight. And that's why, like, when they don't fight, they go dry.
Unfortunately, unionization efforts in the UFC have repeatedly failed, with attempts like Project Spearhead fizzling out, largely due to a palpable fear of retaliation from the promotion. Fighters like Leslie Smith, who have been vocal pioneers pushing for change, have only faced dire consequences, even being cut from the roster right amidst their organizing talks. It really feels like the doors to change are deliberately locked from within. So, what's happening? Fighters are increasingly looking outside the UFC's walls, and what they're discovering is truly changing everything about where the money really is. If fighters can't fundamentally change the UFC from within, They are now realizing they can absolutely change their own situation by simply leaving. And increasingly, they are finding that life outside the UFC can be far more lucrative and significantly less constraining. Take the Professional Fighters League, or PFL. They've strategically positioned themselves as a genuinely fighter-friendly alternative with their unique season-long tournament format. This promises clear paths to substantial payouts and structured million-dollar prizes for winners, which creates a much-needed sense of predictability in a sport notorious for its uncertainty. Rory McDonald, a former UFC welterweight contender, famously moved to PFL after feeling completely undervalued in the UFC. McDonald spoke refreshingly about a system where performance directly ties to rewards, completely devoid of the usual politics of matchmaking. While the UFC certainly boasts larger audiences, the PFL provides a merit-based ladder that feels far more equitable, effectively drawing in fighters who prioritize structure and fair earnings over just sheer stardom. Then there's One Championship, with its distinct Asian roots and a strong emphasis on martial arts values, offering yet another compelling alternative. Here, fighters often praise the promotion's clear focus on athlete welfare, including much better sponsorship freedoms and a true family-like atmosphere. Eddie Alvarez, another prominent name, moved to One after his UFC stint, specifically noting the crucial difference in contract flexibility. One Championship often allows fighters to pursue opportunities in other disciplines without as many restrictive clauses, genuinely fostering a sense of empowerment. But arguably, the most lucrative escape route of all, it's boxing. Francis Ngannou's incredible journey into professional boxing after leaving the UFC proved this point absolutely definitively. He signed deals for massive boxing paydays against global icons, like Tyson Fury, proving that the sweet science can indeed offer life-altering sums of money without the same contractual shackles that bind UFC fighters. Ngannou's groundbreaking success has undeniably inspired others. Tom Aspinall's family, for instance, has openly hinted at pursuing similar paths, where a single high-profile boxing bout could potentially eclipse years of UFC earnings. To truly grasp what these fighters are fighting for, you really need to see the cold, hard numbers that the UFC absolutely does not want you to focus on. When Francis Ngannou recently sat down for a revealing interview, the business breakdown of the UFC's immense profitability became impossible to ignore. The host specifically referenced readily available financial data, clearly showing just how incredibly profitable the UFC actually is.
I don't know. I mean, if you got 48% as the EBITDA, give or take, their margins are 35 to 50%. You got the margins to be able to afford to.
If they get what? The margin of
The
what?
margins are EBITDA. Their EBITDA margins are very high. They make they make a lot of profit. Very profitable. UFC.
You say how much?
48% is the number we saw when we looked at our reports.
48%?
48%.
But then, Ngannou had an even more striking, almost unbelievable statistic to share with the world. He was ready to drop another bombshell on the UFC's financial practices.
The margin, pay the statistic that's going on now, like they make between 80 to 85%.
The implication of this figure is absolutely staggering, with the UFC's revenues approaching a whopping $1.5 billion annually, and potentially even exceeding that with their massive new Paramount deal. The organization's incredible profitability margin clearly suggests there is truly enormous room to significantly increase fighter compensation. The host's conclusion, after hearing these numbers, was refreshingly straightforward and to the point.
So let's just say you do $1, they're keeping 40.
That's the margins we're talking about here. But getting even a fraction of that money to the actual fighters isn't as simple as just asking nicely, or even demanding it. Ngannou himself then explained the fundamental, deeply rooted problem at the core of the UFC's system.
I think the way that the business is set up, like they pay you whatever they want to pay you. They let you pretend that you're negotiating while you're not negotiating.
Then, in 2025, something truly unprecedented happened in UFC history. A massive $35 million antitrust lawsuit settlement was finally approved. This groundbreaking settlement aimed to compensate fighters for alleged wage suppression This wasn't just a simple settlement, it was a profound legal acknowledgement that something had been fundamentally wrong with how the UFC treated its fighters. The lawsuit itself traced all the way back to 2014, when former fighters like Kung Lee and Nate Quarry initially filed suit, directly accusing the UFC of antitrust violations. These violations stemmed from practices like aggressively acquiring rival promotions and then enforcing exclusive deals that effectively prevented athletes from seeking better opportunities elsewhere. Over the years, this evolved into a massive class action effort, ultimately representing over 1,000 fighters who competed in UFC events during that specific period. When the settlement was officially finalized in February 2025, fighters finally began receiving their long-awaited payments. For seasoned veterans like Eddie Alvarez, this announcement brought a mix of emotions. While he publicly saluted the tireless attorneys and brave fighters for their decade-long effort, he also lamented that the total amount still fell significantly short of what he believed was truly deserved. Still, around 35 fighters received more than $1 million each, and approximately 100 fighters received over $500,000, with these payouts being described by attorneys as genuinely life-changing. Beyond the monetary compensation, the settlement also introduced some key operational changes. For the next 5 years, the UFC agreed to limit exclusive negotiating periods to 30 days and matching rights to 4 months, which theoretically gives fighters slightly more leverage when their contracts expire. However, the broader systemic impact on the sport's fundamental structure remained somewhat limited. There were no mandatory revenue-sharing increases, no official union formation, and crucially, no dismantling of the controversial independent contractor model. So, where does all of this leave us right now? The answer lies in understanding that the UFC's dominance, despite appearances, is actually not absolute. It has been sustained by fighters' acceptance of the status quo, and that acceptance, my friends, is undeniably crumbling. When Francis Ngannou was pointedly asked if he was earning more from sponsorships than from his actual fights, his answer was incredibly telling and spoke volumes about the shifting landscape.
Francis, are you getting more money from sponsorships than fights right now? Okay. Is it 4, 5, 10 times more? Is it 10 times more?
But crucially, the potential was undeniably there. The very real possibility of building significant wealth outside the UFC's controlled ecosystem. The conversation continued, and Ngannou's perspective was clear. It could be, if I'm a company, can I hire you to do a commercial on TV? Can I do that? This entire line of thinking represents a fundamental, massive shift in how fighters are now approaching and thinking about their careers. The UFC platform can certainly enable fighters to build powerful personal brands, but increasingly, fighters are realizing that this platform has immense value far beyond what the UFC pays them directly for fighting. The 2025 announcement of that colossal $7.7 billion Paramount media rights deal represents a critical juncture for everyone involved. Dana White, predictably, promised that fighters would definitely benefit from this massive windfall, confidently claiming, "We don't hoard that money." However, history, unfortunately, suggests that a healthy dose of skepticism is absolutely warranted. Analysts are already predicting that while base pays for top fighters may see a rise of about $60 million in renegotiated guarantees, the overall fighter revenue share could actually dip even further, potentially to 15%, even with a nominal 33% increase in total pay. The harsh reality is that without fundamental structural changes, without a strong union, without mandatory revenue splits, and without proper employee classification, this deeply ingrained fundamental imbalance will persist. But, and this is the key, what is changing is fighters' willingness to simply accept that imbalance anymore. Recent endorsements, like the SEIU labor union actively supporting the Ali Act expansion to MMA, offer genuine glimmers of hope, aiming to curb the UFC's monopsony power that so effectively suppresses negotiations and fighter wages. Additional pressures are mounting from various directions as well. College NIL deals, for instance, offering lucrative $100,000 to $400,000 contracts for top wrestlers, are now actively diverting top talent away from traditional MMA pipelines. This development is effectively pressuring the UFC to adapt its compensation structure or risk losing the very next generation of fighting talent. Comparisons with other major sports become incredibly stark when you truly consider them. In professional boxing, fighters often retain a massive 60 to 80%. The NEL splits nearly 50% of its revenue with players, including comprehensive benefits like health insurance and pensions, which are notably absent in the UFC, where fighters are forced to cover their own extensive medical costs. A hypothetical, properly unionized UFC with a 50% revenue share could potentially yield an average annual pay of $700,000 for non-champions, tiered from around $450,000 for newcomers all the way up to $1.2 million for top contenders. But perhaps the most powerful tool fighters possess isn't strikes or even protracted lawsuits. It is simply their feet. Every Francis Ngannou who courageously walks away and undeniably succeeds elsewhere sends a clear, resounding message. Every Justin Gaethje who bravely speaks out boldens countless others. Every Tom Aspinall, whose family openly hints at lucrative boxing opportunities, powerfully reminds the UFC that their perceived monopoly on talent is absolutely not guaranteed. The growing announcement of "we'll get our money elsewhere" isn't coming from a single unified division or a coordinated strike anymore. It's coming from individual fighters, making one strategic decision at a time, slowly but surely building into an unstoppable movement. It's John Jones talking passionately about standing up for younger fighters as part of his legacy. It's Francis Ngannou proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that you can make significantly more money outside the UFC than inside. It's Justin Gaethje publicly declaring he's done sacrificing without proper reciprocation. It's Alex Pereira, a champion questioning his entire future after disheartening news. The UFC truly built an empire on the backs of fighters who for a long time had nowhere else to go. But the world, my friends, is changing rapidly. Viable alternatives are aggressively emerging. Boxing beckons with massive, life-changing purses. The PFL offers structured tournament formats and clearer paths to substantial earnings. One championship provides unparalleled flexibility and genuine respect. And fighters themselves are learning to skillfully leverage their individual platforms for sponsorship deals that often dwarf their actual fight purses. While the 2025 antitrust settlement certainly provided some much-needed retroactive justice, it fundamentally doesn't guarantee future equity. That, my friends, will only come when enough fighters collectively realize their immense power, or when enough of them simply walk away towards demonstrably better opportunity. The UFC's staggering $11.3 billion valuation is built entirely on fighter talent. Without fighters willing to bravely step into that octagon, that colossal value simply evaporates. Because one thing is becoming absolutely crystal clear: fighters are completely done waiting for the UFC to value them appropriately. If the UFC won't pay, they will get their money elsewhere, and they are proving every single day that elsewhere is more than willing to pay them what they deserve. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please click on one of the boxes currently playing on your screen to watch more similar content that you might find interesting.